evening, everyone, from Santa Barbara, California. I'm David Selberg, CEO of Hospice of Santa Barbara. We were so pleased to have reached over 10,000 people, viewers last year from some 46 countries, 46 states, forgive me, and over 55 countries. Tonight, we have almost 1,000 people tuning in from across the United States and internationally. So thank you all for being with us. And a very special thank you to our lead sponsors, beginning with the Santa Barbara Foundation, Robin and Roger Hemovitz, the Natalie Orfala Foundation, amongst others. All of these folks are sponsoring our entire Illuminate Speakers series. So now I have the pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague at Hospice of Santa Barbara, Charles.
Hi there, David. So good to be here tonight, and very much looking forward to listening and hearing some of what she has to share with us tonight. Hospice of Santa Barbara created the Illuminate Speaker Series to reflect the needs expressed to us by our community and people actually around the country. And we're offering this as a free service, but it's only been made possible by people just like you. So if you'd like to consider making a gift to support this series and to ensuring that we can keep this going into the future, you can go to our website. We'd really appreciate it, and it'll help make speakers just like Sharon possible for us. That's it for me. So David, back to you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And now I have the pleasure to introduce the return of Sharon Salzberg. Sharon Salzberg is a meditation pioneer, an industry leader, a world-renowned teacher, and a New York Times best-selling author. As one of the first to bring meditation and mindfulness into mainstream American culture over 45 years ago, her relatable, demystifying approach has inspired generations of meditation teachers and wellness influencers. Sharon is co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and the author of 11 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Real Happiness. So without further ado, we're excited to bring back Sharon Salzberg live and direct from New York City to our Illuminate Speakers series. Hello, Sharon.
Hi there. I'm apologizing in advance for the sounds of New York City, lest they fill the space, but we can also enjoy them, just let them be what they are. And I'm so delighted to be back with this really incredibly loving and welcoming community. And I was wondering, since the chat has been turned on right now, those of you who want to, if you might just enter in the chat where you are calling in from, and if there's one word that would describe your current state, whether it's tired or grateful or anxious or whatever comes to mind. So we'll just take a few minutes and have that happen. We've got Michigan, Australia, Mexico, Santa Barbara, Seattle, Denver, Bozeman. It's so delightful for me just to feel that hi from New York City. And just to get a sense of the energy that's coming together. Overwhelmed. Yeah, I understand that. Really, of course, we are blessed with the technology that allows this to happen. And it's really kind of magic, to have this kind of gathering. Weary, yes. Content, interested, grateful. Joyful. It's amazing how much can be conveyed in one word, isn't it? Frazzled. That's a great word. I'm writing book number 12 now, so I'm really fascinated with words. Hopeful, bewildered. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. And I'm feeling the multiplicity, of where everyone is coming from, and so many different feelings, so many different states, and always changing, which is really our experience. So the question becomes, of course, how do we have a sense of being centered? How do we have a sense of resilience and opening and caring for ourselves and others in the midst of what might be tumultuous or grinding or really difficult circumstance? I was thinking about the word caregivers, of course. Early on, when I began kind of focusing a lot on people who were caregivers, the word itself was very confusing, I found. And what people would say to me often was, I don't know if I count as a caregiver. I'm not a hospice nurse. And that, of course, was the symbol of being on the front lines of a situation that maybe society had not exactly prepared us for, and something that people felt uneasy or frightened about looking directly at. And we would say, well, you can be a caregiver in your family, you could be a caregiver in any line of work. And people would call me sometimes to ask if they were qualified for retreat, and they would say, well, I'm a manager. I don't know that I'm a caregiver. I mean, I care about my staff, and I try to mentor people, I try to nurture people, but I'm not exactly a caregiver. And I say, no, I think that counts. And then people would call me and say, I'm not really a caregiver, but in my friendships, I am the one who gives. I'm the one who takes care of others far more than I receive or feel comfortable ever about receiving. But I don't know if I qualify. And I say, no, I think that counts. And so a very smart conference organizer created this retreat, and she called it People Who Care for People. And then, of course, the people called and said, well, I care for animals. Does that count? So people who care is probably the broadest, most applicable phrase we could use, because caring is consequential. It's beautiful. I don't think I've ever spoken to a caregiver, say a professional caregiver or someone in their family, who has not also talked about the blessing or the privilege of being able to be in that role. And it's also, I mean, we can go through this list of words. It's wearying, it's tiring. There's stress, there's sometimes vicarious trauma. There are whole systems that are not responsive to the needs of the person you care for. There's the fact that we're not in control. It's so difficult, even if it's like a person, if it's a friend, or a friend's child who is drinking a lot, is having some problem. And would that we could just look at them and say, poof, your suffering's gone. It'd be so good. I once was talking to this group of people, and I said, if I were in charge of the universe, it would be so much better a world. And someone in the room challenged me. They said, are you sure? And I thought about it, and I said, I am really sure. But it's not that way. Life isn't that way. And so thus far, as far as I know, no one has made the chip that we can implant in someone else's brain. And we can say, we have the remote control in our hand, and we can say, cheer up. Life's just not like that. We do everything we can, and we are present, and we care. And there's also kind of letting go often that is called for, because we can't insist that someone get better or follow the plan that we have laid out very cleverly for their improvement, whatever, or that they respond on our timetable. And yet, there is so much in that act of generosity, and that's what it is. Whether it's our time, our presence, our loving kindness, our awareness, our willingness to listen, even, maybe someone is not the most scintillating of people, and we listen, truly listen, or we appreciate somebody. My very favorite thing to do going into an organization or a workplace to teach is to ask, how many other people need to have done their job well for you to be able to do your job well? I was talking not all that long ago to a physician who is the head of a large medical practice in a hospital. So this is, mid-pandemic. I don't know if mid is the right word. This is during the pandemic. And he said, who I have an increased appreciation for? It's the cleaning staff. And I thought, well, yeah, really. And, sometime more recently than that, I used that example. I was zooming into some company and they didn't seem very into it. That didn't seem to inspire them, that question. So I said, okay, who's eating today? And let's think about where that food come from. We don't actually just say poof and there's lunch. Somebody planted a seed in some soil and harvested a crop and transported it and sold it to us, or prepared it and sold it to us. Many hands, many lives, and the hopes and the fears of each one of those people, all those many beings. And there's our lunch. We live in an interconnected universe, and sometimes we need to stop actually and just appreciate that. That's a form of generosity. That's a form of giving. So it may be thanking somebody, it may be thinking about them, it may be listening to them, it may be spending time with them, it may be trying to affect some kind of change toward their learning, toward their comfort, toward their solace, whatever it might be. But to be able to do that in a way that is more sustainable, that is expressive of, first of all, of balance, having compassion, maybe not only for the person or people in the situation, but for ourselves as well, and seeing where that leads us. I'll talk about that in a minute. Having a balance between that giving and that offering and that caring and wisdom, which tells us ultimately it's not in your hands. It's not about pass fail, that we give because it's the right thing to do and because of the kind of unification of our hearts in that act. And in that giving, there is also receiving. And there's also often the need for a kind of letting go of a timetable, of expectation, of demand, whatever it might be. So we look at all those things that also make us reluctant to go there, like if you're a caregiver, if you're thinking about resilience, that's an important consideration. Many times people ask me questions, and we'll see how they're phrased tonight, because I'd love to hear from people. Or I use language in the same way, and it implies a kind of perfectionism. Somebody in a program I was recently doing asked something like, how do I maintain inspiration all the time? And how do I keep from ever feeling discouraged or impatient or overwhelmed? And I said, oh, that reminds me of, like, in the meditation world, people would phrase really what is essentially the same question as, how do I stay mindful all day long without a break? How do I maintain the level of concentration I got in my deepest, most still experience of meditation? And my answer for all of that is, it's not going to happen. We get overwhelmed, we fall down, we get exhausted. So the question is, do we know how to pick ourselves up again, or let others help us up? Because sometimes receiving is very, very important as a sometimes new ability. How do we start over? How do we begin again? How do we forgive ourselves for the lapse rather than spend 18 hours like judging ourselves mercilessly for what's just happened? Can we start over? Which is really the point, right? It's once again being present, once again being more balanced, once again having perspective. And that is what resilience actually is. It doesn't imply staying, maintaining, keeping, holding on without a break. It implies being able to begin again, being able to come back, being able to bounce back, and not necessarily to the same old place. Sometimes, having fallen, we get up to a better place, more informed, more aware, kinder to the frailties of others. And so it's that sense of renewal, of beginning again, of recapturing something or renewing something or return. But it may not be return to the same old place. It could be even better. Resilience becomes the major question. And I noticed in the description of this evening was really a quotation that I got from a nurse who was working at Walter Reed Army Hospital and had invited me in. It was National or International Nurses Week. And so I was obviously the meditation program. And they had all kinds of programs. I remember pulling up in the car and people were doing like fly fishing on the lawn, like make-believe fly fishing on the lawn. So I was the meditation program. And there was time before I was going to speak. So I had a tour of one of the wards, and it was heart-wrenching and awakening and, very, very difficult to bear witness to the kind of suffering that was going on with the soldiers and their families. And at the end of the tour, my friend, the nurse, turned to me and she said, the nurses who can stay here, so that of course meant continue to serve here, the nurses who can stay here are not the ones who get lost in sorrow. The nurses who can stay here are the ones who can connect to the resilience of the human spirit. And that quotation has never left me. I know, and we all know really, there's nothing easier, and in a lot of ways, nothing more natural than to get lost in sorrow. I mean, the challenges in life can be immense, and we care. But we don't necessarily want to stay there, because what is the effect on the person, on the people that we care for? What's the effect on ourselves? So resilience is not ignoring that pain or trying to pretend it's not as immense as it might be, but it's also being able to pick ourselves up, to actually care rather than feeling only overwhelmed. And without blaming ourselves for those times we do feel overwhelmed. So we practice resilience. It's actually a practice. I was part of a 4-year program for caregivers through this place in Garrison, New York, called the Garrison Institute. And it started with frontline domestic violence shelter workers, and it moved to directors and supervisors of shelters, and then we moved to international humanitarian aid workers, and then back domestically, especially now for medical personnel, and as well as retreats for people who are taking care of people at home when they could get away and do the retreat, and spouses, children, parents, and that's where like the managers would come in, and all kinds of people said, "What about me?" And we did this exercise in the beginning of each program, which I found really fascinating. You can do it as a reflection. You could do it as journaling, whatever makes sense. So we'll just do a tiny portion of it together now. So in one column, let's say you were journaling, because everyone would be in the same line of work, we would ask people, what's the most stressful aspect of your life right now, of your work life? And since we all are not working in the same field, it can be your life. Just what's the most stressful? Because there were surprises there. Sometimes people here are, domestic violence shelter workers and harrowing conditions. But the thing they would write down, the thing they would realize and then write down was it's bad communication with my coworkers. Maybe that needs to be addressed. So that's the first column. And you might just consider that. The second column was, what do you do to get a break? What do you do to get some rest? What do you do to take care of yourself? What do you do to get perspective? And I think in 4 years, every single person wrote down, listen to music, although it was all kinds of different music. People would often write down things like go out in nature. Sometimes they'd write something that was really troubling, like I drink a lot, and it would be kind of startling for them to realize that. And then in the third column, we said, how about looking back at that second column and writing down how you feel about what you just wrote down? And this was really the most interesting. Like, I took that exercise to military caregivers, like chaplains and medics. And someone had written down in that second column, I kayak, I go out in nature. It's incredibly restorative. And then in the third column, this is a true story. In the third column, he wrote down, I haven't done that in about 7 years. And you think, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Or for the people who did write down, I drink a lot, they would say, I'm worried about that. Maybe I'm going to start to address that. What do we do? Because mostly we have some tool, we have some habit, we have something that gives us a break. Do we even remember it? Is it long ago? And then, of course, because we were offering this program, we would say, well, here are some other tools to consider. Mindfulness, which will help you find an ability to be centered, somewhat more centered, no matter what's going on. Help you get some space from your thoughts and feelings, not to dismiss them or to be cold or indifferent, but just to have some space so that you don't have to feel so overwhelmed, so enmeshed in everything that comes up, so that you have more of a sense of choice and you're more empowered, so that you can feel really difficult feelings like grief and anger authentically without blaming yourself, without feeling ashamed, without belittling yourself, but also without being defined by them. That's actually the particular skill of mindfulness. And can you remember the joy? Even in the most difficult circumstance, there's often something that is a kind of magic of caring, of connecting, of noticing remembering, look at the sky. I just came back to New York City, and somebody had given me a plant long ago, and it's still alive. It's like a very magic thing, because I've never managed that before. Um, and I thought, look at it. Don't just take that for granted. Take a look at that. Just those moments of joy that we can capture. There's so much that we are capable of just through the power of our own minds when we use the faculty of attention, when we both remember the tools we already had and to bring them back, and when we experiment with what we may be capable of. So we're going to do a little bit of meditation practice together now. I know a number of you are probably quite familiar with meditation, and for a number of you, it's new, and that's all fine. Meditation, mindfulness meditation, is basically attention training. What do we pay attention to? How do we pay attention? And even ultimately, who do we pay attention to? Who do we ignore? Who do we look through? And so on. So in terms of how we pay attention, very often we find we're kind of scattered, we're distracted, we're all over the place. And what we do in the meditation practice, first of all, is we gather. We gather all of our attention and we settle. They say that our minds often go to the past. And interestingly enough, we often go to some situation where we now have some regret. But we don't go back there for lessons learned or with an eye to how to make amends. We just go over it and over it and over it and over it. And I'd say, especially in a time like ours right now, it's an and. We leap ahead into the future with a lot of anxiety. Like, what if? What if I go back to New York City and I haven't been there in so long, and I turn on the faucet and the water comes out and it gives me Legionnaire's disease? How am I going to know if I have Legionnaire's disease? I heard you can get Legionnaire, it's just like, whoa. Right? And so then we have the burden of this world that has not happened and may never happen, and things can be hard enough without it, but we have it now, right? And so learning how not to get so enmeshed, so caught in those two situations, but to gather our attention and to arrive. And certainly there are useful ways of thinking about the past and the future, but these are not those. So we gather and we settle. We just come back to the moment, maybe using the vehicle of our breath or something happening in our body, something easy to access. And then our attention goes out again, and we know how to let go gently. It's what one of my teachers once called exercising the letting go muscle. We learn how to let go gently and to return. No blame, no long anguished periods of trying to figure out why we're the worst meditator that ever lived. We see if we can let go and just start over. Let go and start over. And that is exactly the kind of almost like muscle memory we need in life. Oh yeah, I got overwhelmed. Oh yeah, I yelled at my kids. Oh yeah, I got impatient. And you know what? I can start over. Now I'm here. We practice in a formal sense, maybe, I don't know, let's say 12 minutes a day, because that's one of my neuroscientist friends told me. Will change your brain if you just practice meditation 12 minutes a day. And then we have it as a much more accessible tool when we're working, when we're on the phone, when we're on Zoom, when we're commuting, whatever it might be. We start to feel that edge of being overwhelmed. We come back. And we come back to the moment through these very simple vehicles. Okay, so we're going to sit together now. You can just sit comfortably, be at ease. You can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. You can start just by listening to sound. We'll see if I introduce New York at this point, or the sound of my voice, or other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing your experience to come and go. And of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others. But we don't have to chase after them, to hold on or push away. Just let them come, let them go. Bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. See if you can feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space, we think about like picking up a finger and poking it in the air, but space is already touching us. It's always touching us. We just need to receive it. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, just the normal, natural breath. Wherever you feel it most distinctly, the nostrils, at the chest, or at the abdomen. You can find that place. Bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. Without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. It's just one breath. And if you find your attention wandering, you get swept up in fantasies or thoughts, you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. We say the most important moment is the next moment after you've been gone, after you've been lost. That's the moment we practice letting go, and it's the moment we practice beginning again. So you realize you've been gone, see if you can let go, bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you, and I'm going to turn things back to David.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing your poignant and heart-centered message and this meditation. Thank you so much. I now have the pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues and friends at Hospice of Santa Barbara, who will help facilitate a conversation with Sharon and involve all of us here in this community at this talk. And her name is Jeannie West. Jeannie West is Santa Barbara Hospice Community Engagement Manager. Her responsibilities include teaching programs related to end-of-life care, sharing with the community what Hospice of Santa Barbara does, and conducting work on advanced healthcare directives across our community. Jeannie has received numerous accolades from community groups such as the Human Services Association and the Central Coast Alzheimer's Association. So Jeannie, thank you for being with us as well, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, David. And Sharon, thank you. You touched on most, if not all, of the 10 key elements that I actually made notes of, having been a personal caregiver. So I don't know if you had access to my computer to look at my notes, but it was pretty amazing. Yeah, I know, I'm just teasing you here. But I really want to comment on the fact that so many people in this world are in formal caregiver roles. And thank you for identifying all of the people that are caregivers, but don't necessarily have that title with their job description. I'm profoundly grateful that you called out the sanitation, the housekeeping people. What a job they have. Tell me a little more about how we can be sensitive to the people that we interact with in different jobs that truly are caregivers.
Well, for me, so much comes back to attention, and I think about the people, checkout people in the supermarket is the common example that we find kind of neutral because we're more or less indifferent to them. And we very rarely look at them. We mostly look through them. And so the training really is to look at them. You don't have to force yourself to, swear this is my best friend and I'm going to spend time with you or anything, but just to be fully present. And so much happens with that. I often think about this time, an earlier time I was living in New York City, and a friend of mine who's a writer was living in the same neighborhood, and he showed me a copy of his manuscript. And in his manuscript, he wrote about often going into the corner grocery store and pretty well seeing the same woman working behind the counter. And he said, I realized that I had very little sense of her because I never really paid any attention to her. I had maybe a slight sense that she was a little bit unhappy or a little bit grim-faced, but very slight. Mostly, I just didn't take her in. He said he was so shocked at himself that what he wrote was, for all I realized she was a person who, had a story, who had joys, who had sorrows, who wanted to be happy, just like I want to be happy. She might as well have been a cash register with arms. And he was so upset at seeing that habit of his that he said, okay, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to pay absolute complete attention to her. So he went in there, and this is, all that he's writing down. He said, I went in there, and the first thing I noticed was that she was singing along to something on the radio, and she had an exquisitely beautiful voice. So I said, wow, you have a really beautiful voice. And she lit up. She gave me this big radiant smile. So the story goes on from there because I knew exactly who he was talking about because we lived in the same neighborhood, and I thought, I don't really pay any attention to her either. I'm going to go in there, and the story goes on. But that's it. It's like life is full of surprises when we pay attention, and when we don't, we're just disconnected. So that's what I think we really need to do, and it's delightful to be able to do that.
It feels good to be the giver and to acknowledge someone who can be so taken for granted. My number one, as having been a shoes on the ground caregiver for a loved one, was how important it is to allow yourself to make mistakes and to forgive yourself for those mistakes. That is true self-compassion. How do we get better at doing that? Because we always want to be blaming. I shouldn't have done that. Why didn't I watch what I said before the words came out? There's a lot of self-blame that goes on for caregivers because we think we need to be perfect. Help us understand how to forgive ourselves and move on.
I mean, for me, it starts with seeing the problem, and it's a tremendously common tendency. That's why we have a whole phrase for it, self-compassion, and I would even start with just a kind of reflection, like, does self-compassion seem to you to be weakness or indulgence or laziness? Because that's how many people hear it. And there are all these exercises you can do, like imagine your closest friend is sitting in a chair next to you. Now you start talking to them, and the way you talk to yourself, you can't do it. And you practice like rephrasing. How would I give that message to my friend? Like, sad you dropped the ball, like, I'm sure you'll do better this afternoon or whatever, rather than you are a waste of space, which is what we'd say to ourselves. There are lots of ways of doing that, but I start with hearing that harsh voice because it needs to be acknowledged, and then reminding myself that's beside the point, or that's an old habit, or that's not onward leading. You don't have to chastise yourself, a lot, but just to realize that's a habit, and it's not gonna bring you what you want, which is the ability to begin again and to move on. And so something I also do, I recommend, is that if you have a kind of repeated demeaning inner critic, if it's like the same voice over and over again, give it a name, give it a wardrobe, give it a persona, and then see how you relate to it. So I named my own inner critic Lucy, after I apologize to any Lucys are on the call, after the character in the Peanuts comic strip. Because I once, I moved into this house to do a retreat, and someone had left a cartoon on the desk that was my bedroom, just coincidentally, and from the Peanuts comic strip. And in the first frame, Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, "Oh, Charlie Brown, you know what your problem is? The problem with you is that you're you." And then in the second frame, poor Charlie Brown says, "Well, what in the world can I do about that?" And then Lucy says, "I don't pretend to be able to give advice. I merely point out the problem." And the Lucy voice had been so dominant in my earlier life. But what I saw through, a lot of training and meditation was that I could relate to it differently. Instead of like, "You're right, Lucy. You're always right. I'm worth nothing." Or, "I can't believe Lucy's still here. I've been meditating all this time. I just went to therapy. Why is Lucy still here?" What I would do when I would, in fact, it happened very soon after I saw the cartoon. Something great happened for me. And my very first thought was, that's never going to happen again. And I responded with, "Hi, Lucy." Or my favorite form was, "Chill out, Lucy. Just chill, have a seat, take a nap, whatever."
What a reminder that self-talk helps us get through some bad habits and to change our ways. Change is always possible. Sharon, another thing on my list that you clearly referred to, and I'm going to kind of coordinate these two thoughts. I call it take time to be, and also the importance of respite. Under that take time to be, I kind of threw out a couple things, and I'd like you to just respond to your thoughts on this. It can be mindfulness or meditation practice. It can be kind of a retreat or a centering prayer. That was extremely successful for me, meeting with a group of ladies every week to just read a passage and go into silence about it. And I felt so connected. And then the other thing on that take time to be is the importance of exercise. I made it a point to go out and walk with friends a couple days a week. So chat with us a bit about how you see the importance of being for yourself as a way of taking care of yourself.
I think it's extremely important, and I feel a lot of warmth when you talk about centering prayer, because my friends and I, my colleagues and I began this retreat center in Barre, Massachusetts, the Insight Meditation Society, in 1976. And 2 towns over is Spencer, Mass, where Father Keating was the abbot, and Father Basil was living there, and we all became good friends, and they, evolved and expressed centering prayer, as a thing. So it really feels, very close. The hardest part is the reluctance to do it, usually for people. It feels wrong, it feels selfish, I don't have the time. Even the word rest, which I use several times in the instruction. When I wrote Real Happiness, which came out, I don't know, maybe like 12 years ago, it was has many guided meditations in it. And when it first came back from the editor, she said, "You're using the word rest a lot. Are you very tired?" And I said, "Well, probably, but that's the word." And it's difficult. It feels like too much to do, but it's restoring. It's essential. And part of the reason I suggested that exercise is because we all have personal means that we might turn to. But I think you hit the main kind of principles underlying those. Movement, exercise, sleep is a good one. Rest, being, some period. It could be moments. It doesn't have to be extensive, where we don't feel so responsible, but we can simply be with our experience. And that's why even sometimes something as simple as not multitasking all the time. Maybe you're, drinking a cup of tea, and rather than also be checking your email, and also, it's not an activity that if you just pay attention is so lengthy, it's going to undo your to-do list, but you feel the warmth of the teacup, and you smell the tea, and you taste the tea. And it's an experience that feels fulfilling rather than incomplete. It will make an enormous difference.
It's all about the senses, isn't it? All of what you just shared is about the senses. I have a few other things, but I do want to just acknowledge we have a number of things in the chat box. My favorite being for myself is doing daily gratitude. Isn't that an important one? The gratitude is intentional. It just comes as I focus on being present in my environment. All part of being. So thank you to Suzanne, who shared that comment with us. I want to move on to something that I think needs to be acknowledged, and you have definitely done that. As you said, caring is consequential. It's both a blessing and a privilege, but it's mighty darn hard to be in the role of a caregiver. So my way of reflecting on that is to say, it's a powerful emotional journey. It's important to share this journey with a friend or a counselor. And that's what we offer at Hospice of Santa Barbara. The family members who are longtime caregivers, it's stressful. It's emotionally painful. How do we, other than counseling, support those in our family, our circle of friends who are caregivers? What strategies would you put out to our listeners here around the world?
Well, I think you're bringing up a really crucial point, which is community. And the very role can be very isolating. But to have some kind of community is the most important thing in a way for help. And I don't know that I could think of specific strategies so much as not going it alone, both because to see the universality of our frailty, to even admit, and it's so embarrassing sometimes because we think we should be perfect, to admit how hard it is, and to recognize that society is structured in a way so that we're not going to naturally necessarily get a lot of support. Professionally, these are roles that are often not heralded, and they should be. Like when I first started working with the domestic violence shelter workers, all I could think of was like society would fall apart if these people weren't here, and why aren't they being treated like that? All the way to the international humanitarian aid workers, people going into the refugee camps, to parents, to I was with a friend earlier today who is the perfect example of the sandwich generation. She's got a daughter who needs her a lot right now, and she's got a 97-year-old mother in another city that she just flew back from, setting things up for her mother in some way. And it's hard. And to even have somebody say, yeah, I lost my temper too, or I just needed to stop and take a break, or because you had talked earlier about forgiving ourselves for making a mistake. And I thought even prior to that, we have to forgive ourselves for what we feel, and realize that that image of some superhuman who's just gonna lie through is not real. And so we need one another just as that kind of reminder. And also sometimes just to laugh. It's like when we did that exercise with the domestic violence shelter workers, which was the first time I'd done it. Like, what do you do for resilience and getting a break and getting perspective? And, it was a very private thing. People didn't have to disclose what they'd written down, but some people wanted to. And so the first person who spoke said, I watch a tremendous amount of American Idol. And I just like doubled over laughing because I'd only seen it once. And I was at someone's house and they made me watch it. And for me, it was like watching continual rejection. It was like the most horrible experience of pain, like, oh no, they didn't make it, but for her, it was really sublime, I guess, but we just had a really good laugh over our differences. We need one another, and it's a really difficult journey all alone.
Indeed. Well, I see we're nearing the closure time. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate all of our caregivers in whatever role they have, and to remind all of us, there are those who are caregivers now, there are those who have been caregivers, and there are those who will need caregivers. Again, those Rosalind Carter words. We're all going to be walking in the shoes at one time. Thank you so much, Sharon, for enlightening us to be who we are, to forgive ourselves for what doesn't go well, and to take the time to use the meditation, the quiet, the reaching out to friends, because we all need this. We sure do. So a million thanks from 1,000 people who are tuning in from all over the world. What kudos this is to you and to Hospice of Santa Barbara. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to our CEO, David Salzberg. Peace and blessings to you also, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, for facilitating. And Sharon, on behalf of the hundreds of all of us, thank you for sharing your heart and your thoughts and words tonight. We're all so deeply, deeply grateful. We are pleased at Hospice of Santa Barbara to offer this Illuminate Speakers Series free. But we could not do it without your support and help, as I've shared throughout the series. So please consider a donation to ensure the future of this series by using one of the methods shown here on the screen. Also, please visit our website to sign up for upcoming Illuminate Speakers Series events, freely offered to everybody, but pre-registration is required ahead of time. Please mark your calendars, as you'll see that Amanda Klutz will be joining us on April 20th. In addition to Amanda Klutz on CBS and recently featured on Dancing with the Stars, she shares her personal story of losing her husband, who was a famous Broadway star, and she lost him quickly and very publicly due to COVID at the beginning of the pandemic. And she shares her overwhelming loss, her love, her hope, and her need for community as she heals. So please stay tuned for that. And thank you again, everyone. Have a good rest of the day and evening, and be well. Good night.